Prologue. The Whispering Relic. Night blanketed Naggaroth like a shroud of morning silk, and the air above the desolate tundra howled with the icy screams of the damned. In the heart of the crumbling spire of Thurley, long since consumed by vines of frost and shadow, an ancient seer convulsed upon a dais of obsidian. Her name was Saorith Drelda, once a prophet of Cain's blood temples, now a creature unbound by mortal time, her body fused to the roots of a tree that had grown through the shattered marble like a talon through flesh. Her milky eyes rolled in their sockets, unseeing yet staring into a realm that no sane being dared glimpse. Around her, 9 braziers burned with unnatural green flame, their smoke rising in reverse, curling down toward her open mouth, like breath returning to a corpse. A congregation of masked sorceresses chanted in a tongue dead before Uthuan first wept, their skin carved with the runes of forbidden divination. The winds of magic swirled violently, making the temple stones scream with protest. Then, silence, a rupture in the veil. Saorith's voice came, low and guttural, layered with 1,000 others, male and female, young and ancient, all speaking as one. Under ashen earth and bone-filled halls, the heart sleeps where the stars forgot. Blood will call it, shadow will bind it. 2 fangs shall clash over its pulse, and from their war shall rise a darkness even the gods fear. Lightning clawed across the sky, and the walls of the ruined city shuddered as if waking from an eon-long nightmare. The braziers exploded in pillars of green flame, scorching 2 sorceresses where they stood. They didn't scream. They were silenced instantly, their bodies crumbling into steaming piles of black dust. Beneath the dais, far below in the hollow belly of Thurleer, something stirred. Miles below the seer's altar, where even the light of witch lamps dared not reach, the stone beneath the ruins pulsed faintly. The crypts that lined the catacombs were filled with the broken bones of long-dead Aelven kings and their enslaved retainers, now mummified and nailed to the walls in cruel parody of life. Here, time had decayed into stillness, until now. The whisper echoed in the dark. It was not heard by ears, but felt in the marrow. Ulgu. A tremor rolled through the black soil, cracking ancient tomb walls and sending rivulets of shadow, actual darkness given shape, slithering like serpents through the crevices. The artifact had awakened. Deep in a chamber hidden beneath layers of hexed stone and cursed bone, a crystalline heart began to beat. Once, twice. Each thrum sent ripples through the weave, warping time and space around it. The runes etched upon the sarcophagus that housed it, words drawn from languages even chaos demons refused to speak, began to glow like fresh wounds. And the whispers grew louder. Above ground, hundreds of miles away, in the obsidian tower place of House Varnix, matron Vexira awoke screaming, drenched in ice-cold sweat. She clawed at her throat, choking on a voice that was not her own. Her chamber servants rushed to her, but she struck them down with sorceress bolts of withering pain, searing flesh from bone with casual cruelty. The walls of her chamber cracked from the force of the spell. One servant's skull exploded like overripe fruit against the marble pillar. Another dropped, gurgling, with her spine turned inside out. Vexira rose, breath heaving, her silver eyes gleaming with mad clarity. She had seen it. A city swallowed by time. A relic of unspeakable power. A war that would drown Naggaroth in blood and shadow. The Heart of Ulgu was real, and it was calling. Chapter 1. House Varnix Claim. The glaciers of northern Naggaroth cracked beneath the weight of obsidian-banded siege wagons, their wheels groaning as they clawed over the jagged ice. Spikes of black iron jutted from the vehicles like ribs torn from some great beast, and chained cold ones snarled beneath armored muzzles, dragging the entourage toward a forgotten ruin rising from a chasm like the ribs of a buried leviathan. Eventually the Leviath appeared between the peaks, and the Burieds had pitched their tent. At the head of this grim procession, riding a throne palanquin draped in flayed skin and suspended by bone-stained warriors, sat High Matron Vexira Varnix. Her gaze was cold, her face sculpted in ageless cruelty, with eyes like twin shards of moonlit obsidian. She wore a crown of serrated silver that bled down into her armor, a living fusion of flesh and hexed steel. A corset of witch bones cinched her waist while her gauntlets hissed with venom runes, ever hungry, twitching like spiders in her wake. The ruins of Thurlair, long thought lost to ice and madness, lay before her like a carcass waiting to be picked clean. She had followed the whispering echoes in her skull for weeks, dreams of pulsing shadows and spiraling descent, of serpents made of silence and tombs that bled memories. She had watched her concubine flay himself in sleep, murmuring forgotten names. She had seen her favored son vomit tar as he spoke prophecies in tongues not even her spell scribes could decipher. And she knew the Heart of Ulgu was real. Now it was hers. With a gesture of her talon-ringed hand, Vexira sent her scouts into the ruin. A dozen shades slipped into the blackened arches, and only 6 returned. The survivors were twisted, not in body but soul. Their eyes flickered not with fear, but hunger, the hunger of those who had seen something no mortal should. One whispered of a vault sealed with a lock made of blood and reflection. Another claimed the walls moaned with regret. Vexira smiled. These were not warnings. They were confirmations. She descended into the ruins personally, flanked by her death coven, 4 sisters clad in skin-bound armor, their mouths sewn shut with silver thread, their tongues replaced by glyph-etched needles. The descent was steep, winding down spiral stairs that shimmered with impossible geometry. Torches failed to burn here, their flames inverted and pulled inward, devoured by an unseen gravity. Time stretched and collapsed. One footstep could take a moment or an hour. In the heart of the earth, behind a veil of magic that hissed and wept as it was torn, she found it. The chamber was immense, a dome of black glass and pulsing vines that squirmed like entrails. Suspended above a pit of boiling shadow hovered the Heart of Ulgu, a floating crystal the size of a warrior's chest, shaped like a serrated gemstone, constantly shifting, as if it dreamed of being something else. The artifact pulsed with every beat of her own heart. Her knees buckled, not from fear, from reverence. It knew her. It welcomed her. The Death Coven began their ritual, opening veins in their own throats, their black blood spilling into runes etched across the chamber. They didn't scream. They were beyond such things. Vexira stepped into the blood circle, raising her arms, allowing the voices in her skull to guide her tongue. She called to it. It answered. The crystal dropped from its suspension with a deafening thunderclap and embedded itself into her chest. Not pierced, fused. Her flesh cracked like porcelain, bloodless and glowing. Veins of shadow spread across her body like black lightning, threading through her armor, her bones, her soul. She did not cry out. She laughed, and the sound was wrong, echoing with tones that no throat should produce. Her skin writhed, her eyes turned black. Her hair flowed upward, caught in a wind that came from within her. Her warriors knelt. Those who did not were flayed alive by the sheer pressure of her ascension. One man exploded, reduced to a spray of mist and pulped bone. Another clawed his own face apart, chanting praises until his voice was gone and his throat was nothing but ragged holes. Vexira stood reborn, no longer High Matron, or the bearer of Ulgu. She emerged from the ruins with the heart pulsing visibly beneath her armor, like a second soul. Her army fell to its knees. Even the cold ones whimpered, cowed by her aura. The skies above twisted, clouds forming unnatural spirals. She raised one hand. "Naggaroth will bleed," she said, her voice a chime of death bells. "And House Varnix shall drink deep from its veins." Thus the first stone was cast, and the world began to unravel. Chapter 2. The Wrath of House Draith. The halls of House Drelith's fortress keep, Vraxtalon, were carved not from stone, but from the bones of sea monsters dragged screaming from the black-spined depths. Spires of ribcage and vertebrae rose like the twisted fingers of drowned gods, their marrow inlaid with obsidian veining that glowed crimson under torchlight. Crimson banners, soaked in real blood and ritually preserved, fluttered in the windless corridors, each inscribed with the victories of generations long dead and never forgotten. In the throne hall, the scent of formaldehyde and rot clung thick in the air. Dozens of noble sons and daughters flanked the basalt pathway, armored in soul steel, each bearing ceremonial scars shaped like fanged serpents, the mark of House Draith. They were statues in flesh, eyes gleaming with malice, weapons sheathed in scabbards made from the hides of traitors. At the head of this gallery of disdain sat Lord Mauric Drelith, upon a throne made from the fused skulls of his forebearers, each one branded with a rune of loyalty. He was tall, even for a Druki, his armor etched with writhing patterns that moved when unobserved. His face, partially obscured by a mask wrought in the likeness of a weeping demon, revealed only his jaw, chiseled, bloodless, and clenched with eternal fury. A messenger knelt before him, what was left of one anyway. His legs had been shattered at the knees as a sign of respect, his arms bound in barbed chain, face torn to ribbons by cruel lashes that still dripped crimson onto the bone tiles. The hall was silent, save for the distant sound of muffled screams from the torture pits below. "Say it again," Malrak whispered, his voice like razors on silk. The messenger whimpered through broken teeth. The heart claimed. By Vexira Varnix. She bears it now, in flesh, she. His jaw snapped out of alignment with a crack like lightning, shattered by Malric's telekinetic wrath. Blood poured from the messenger's mouth as he twitched on the ground, dying without dignity. Malric did not move. His armored fingers tightened around the hilt of his sheathed sword, Naltir, its hilt fashioned from the femur of a sorcerer who had once dared defy him. "Early was mine," Malric hissed. "My blood soaked that soil long before her bastard line learned to speak." He rose, and the hall pulsed with tension. A collective shudder ran through the assembled nobles as the air thickened with power. The sound of metal groaning echoed from his armor, its soul-bound spirits writhing as they tasted the scent of coming violence. "You will not take from House Drelith and walk unchallenged," he growled. "You will not steal our birthright and live." He turned to his inner circle, the blades of the Hollow Court. These were not mere lieutenants. Each had murdered a sibling to rise to their position. Each bore the mark of Cain's unseen kiss, a sigil burned into the back of their tongues, granting them silence and death in equal measure. Mobilize the Dreadclaws. Wake the war beasts. Arm the shadow marchers. I want spies embedded in every whorehouse and blood temple between Har Gannith and Claire Caronde. Find her. One of the blades stepped forward, masked in blood-dyed silk. "My lord, she wears the artifact," She has merged with it, the scouts say. She cannot be—" Malric silenced him with a glance. A whip of shadow coiled from his hand and flayed the blade's face in a single motion, tearing skin from skull. The man fell, twitching, eyes melting in his sockets, as the sorcery seared through his nervous system. "She can be killed," Malric said coldly. "She just needs to be carved apart slowly enough to separate artifact from flesh." He turned and strode from the hall, his cloak of living shadows dragging behind him like smoke trailing from a battlefield pyre. The next night, across the churning sea of chill, fire bloomed like flowers in the snow. The Draith fleet struck without warning. Varnic's outposts were reduced to ruin, their watchtowers toppled, their garrisons massacred in hours. Witches were nailed to their own cauldrons, their screams swallowed by the howling wind. Beastmasters found their pens gutted, cold ones slaughtered for sport, their heads piled into obscene totems. One fortress, Kel Adrath, known for its spiked walls and unbreakable gates, fell in 20 minutes. The Drelith shock troops arrived silently, cloaked in spells of erasure, and detonated shadow bombs within the walls. The explosions didn't just kill, they unmade. Where they landed, people vanished in mid-mation, leaving only ash prints on the walls. A mother nursing her child was found split down the middle, her left half still holding the babe, her right smeared across a corridor like paint. Lord Malric himself descended upon the central tower, landing upon a wyvern stitched from bone and sinew. He did not ask for surrender. He demanded names. He carved his questions into flesh, dragging secrets from tongues with poisoned hooks. The High Captain of the fortress, after losing both eyes, confessed that Vexira had fortified herself deep within the cursed hinterlands. Malric rewarded him by removing the rest of his skin in one precise spell, turning him into a writhing tapestry of pain now hung above his war room. In the sanctum of his keep, surrounded by the scent of boiling blood and smoldering spell ink, Malric traced the movements of Vexira's army with obsidian markers. The map was drawn on the flayed hide of a Varnic's noble, her skin inked with the shifting paths of Vexira's agents. His fingers trembled with anticipation. He could almost hear the heart, even now, beating, whispering, calling to him. "It was mine," he muttered, "and I will take it back, with your heart still beating in my hands." And so the wrath of House Draith began, not as a declaration, but as a purge. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Blades. Naggaroth bled rumors like an open wound. From the obsidian towers of Caron-Car to the blighted shipyards of Clare-Caron, whispers moved with the chill wind. The Heart of Ulgu has awakened. Varnix holds it. Draith wants it. And war is coming. The allure of slaughter, silver, and shadow magic ignited Naggaroth's underbelly like fire through dry bone. Forgotten legions stirred. War covens unfurled ancient banners woven with hair and sewn with the teeth of executed nobles. Mercenary captains whose names were spoken only in crypt chants prepared for the blood-gilded coin. Assassins sharpened dream-poisoned daggers, their contracts inked in blood drawn from their own hearts. Both houses summoned war. Both houses answered with nightmares. In the fortified chasm fortress of Varnix, High Matron Vexira stood atop the Impaler's balcony, arms raised in invocation. Below, an army roared in unison, thousands of Druki warriors clad in lacquered black armor, each bearing sigils of cruelty and conquest. Their eyes gleamed red beneath bat-winged helms, and their blades thirsted for kin-blood. Black banners depicting the Eye of Ulgu, a new sigil, radiant and bleeding shadow, waved from the battlements. Her claim to the heart was no longer rumor. It was doctrine. Her war priestess had already penned scripture. her sorceresses weaving psalms of the heart's dominion. Behind the army stood the skin dancers, a cabal of sadists who wore the faces of their victims and moved with the grace of eels in blood. Their whips hissed through the air, training war beasts bred in subterranean laboratories, things with too many eyes and teeth in places no mouth should be. To Vexira's left stood the Grief Pact, a mercenary order of exiled nobles who had fed their own families to the cauldrons of Cain to earn favor. Their leader, Mistress Illyrian, wore no armor, only scars, tattoos of the names she had murdered, and a cloak made from the skin of her own daughter. Vexira raised her voice. It was not loud, but it carried through flesh and bone, through the marrow of every warrior. "The heart does not ask for loyalty," she hissed, eyes burning with shadows. "It demands it. The blood we spill will not be for Naggaroth, or legacy, or gods. It will be for me, for House Varnix, for power unchained." The army screamed back, a noise more animal than language. It reverberated through the canyon, shaking loose avalanches of bone and stone. Far across the wastes, deep within the mountain fortress of Bar Exal, Lord Malric Draith stood before a map table lit by balefire. He was not alone. Before him knelt the Vileborn, assassins born of torture and raised in darkness. Their tongues had been severed at birth, their eyes replaced with enchanted stones that pulsed with forbidden sight. They answered not to orders, but to intent. And Malric's intent was massacre. Behind them, chained and frothing, were the brute wardens, handlers of beasts so foul they could not be named. Cages throbbed with abominations, manticores crossbred with chimerae, wyverns born without skin, and spiders the size of war wagons, with human faces grafted to their abdomens. Malric turned to his generals. "Varnix seeks gods," he snarled. "Let us send her demons." Captain Virax of the Iron-Shard Legion slammed his fist to his chest. His armor was studded with fingers from every slain Varnix officer since the last skirmish. "We march in 3 days, my lord. Our witches have brewed tears from the Weeping Tower. Our corsairs sail through fog that eats light." Another general, Lady Necthyra, licked her lips. She wore a mask of living spiders, each one venomous and loyal only to her heartbeat. "Shall I release the Shadebound?" she purred. "They've not tasted noble blood in decades." Malric grinned beneath his helm. "Yes, loose them. Let the first screams reach her ears before the blades ever do." Elsewhere, in the shadow havens and gutters of Naggaroth cities, mercenaries answered the call. The Red Maw Compact, slavers turned warlords, sent their death drums echoing through Claire Caron's drowned alleys. The Crimson Vow, a rogue sorority of executioners cast out from Hellebron's favor, pledged themselves to Draith after bathing in the hearts of their last clients. The Chainflayers, former warlocks now addicted to soul-ripping, offered their blades to Varnix in exchange for the right to devour their kills. Even the black market guilds, ever neutral, could not resist. Blades for sale, poisons for rent, war beasts, siege engines, spells that unraveled fate, all had a price, and both houses paid. In the days that followed, the skies over Naggaroth darkened, not from weather, but from ash and spellfire. Villages vanished overnight, swallowed by test strikes, magical storms, and predatory warbands hungry for practice. Roads were littered with crucified scouts and mutilated spies. Every shadow became a potential killer. Every alliance was a knife waiting to turn. The land trembled beneath the weight of sharpened steel and unspoken promises of ruin. War had not yet begun, but the blades had gathered, and blood was already flowing. Chapter 4. The Pact of Shadows. The moon over Naggaroth was a cracked thing, pale, broken, veiled in smog and shadow. It shed no warmth, only a sickly glow that stretched long, shivering shadows across the desolation beyond Bloodspire citadel. It was here, beneath the skeletal remains of a collapsed Colosseum once used for public flayings, that High Matron Vexira Varnix awaited her guests. She stood alone, but not unguarded. Shadows coiled at her feet, flickering unnaturally against the stone. They writhed in silence, not cast by her body, but watching her, drawn from her very essence since she fused with the Heart of Ulgu. Her breath misted in the air, but even that seemed to drift in the wrong direction, downwards, into the cracks of the ground where whispers lingered. The cult of the Veiled Eye had agreed to parley. No one summoned the cult. One merely offered absence. Absence of light, of noise, of witnesses. And if they chose to appear, they would. If not, the petitioner usually vanished within days, their skin left draped over their own throne, eyes sewn shut with spider silk. Vexira had brought no guards. Such things insulted the Veiled. She waited for hours. Then reality bent. The air folded inward like crushed vellum, and the light died. Not dimmed, died. One by one the stars vanished, swallowed not by cloud, but by intent, and from the broken Colosseum's archways they arrived. They moved like robed reflections in cracked mirrors, each shrouded in dark silk that shimmered with faces that were not their own. Their limbs moved at impossible angles, their footsteps making no sound yet echoing in the bones of the earth. 12 in all. None spoke, none breathed. At their center walked the voice without eyes, their emissary. His face was a void, literally, absent, the flesh beneath his hood peeled away to reveal an ever-shifting hole into somewhere else. One could look upon it too long and feel their own name slip from memory. Vexira bowed her head slightly, a concession, not of weakness but of understanding. "You know why I summoned you," she said. Her voice did not echo, not here. The voice without eyes tilted his hood toward her. Then came speech, not aloud, but within her. It was not one voice, but hundreds, whispering from the crevices of her mind. "You wield the heart. You feed it. You crave its promise. We see. I want the Dreiths eradicated," Vexira said plainly. "Not defeated, not scattered. Unmade. I want their name to be a ghost that shrinks from firelight. I want their children unborn, their histories unwritten." The air around the emissaries shimmered, as if their mere contemplation bent causality. "Your vengeance sings, but all songs demand verses in pain. What do you offer the Veiled Eye?" Vexira reached into her chest, into the folds of armor fused to flesh. She withdrew a jar of pale glass, filled not with liquid, but with a flickering, screaming shadow. It twisted violently within its prison, clawing at invisible walls. "The soul of my firstborn," she said. "Purified, untainted. He died never knowing fear. I denied him even that. It is yours." The voice without eyes took the jar, and the shadow inside fell silent. A dozen veiled heads turned slightly inward. There was no nod, no gesture, but Vexira knew she had been accepted. "Then you shall have the pact. Our assassins shall bleed time, our witches shall hex the moon, our beasts shall drink the screams of seers. We shall whisper into dreams and drown truth in doubt. Draith will rot, slowly, subtly, and in ways they will never comprehend. But I want their lord," Vexira said. Her eyes narrowed. "Malric, I want his mind. Broken. Give me that." "His mind is already ours. He just doesn't know where it ends." A figure stepped forward, unlike the others. She was taller, clad in robes that bled into the ground. Her face was visible, but wrong. its features constantly shifting, a blend of all who looked upon her. She extended a hand, long-fingered with nails that bent like hooks. Vexira took it without flinching. Pain exploded in her mind. Every memory turned inside out. She saw her childhood as a ravenous eel. She remembered being murdered by her mother. She screamed and choked on the echo of her own funeral. And then it was over. The pact was sealed. The cult of the Veiled Eye did not leave. They simply ceased to be present. Vexira stood alone again, blood dripping from her nose, her nails blackened to the root, eyes burning with truths not meant for flesh. She smiled. And far away, in the depths of his war room, Lord Malric Draith awoke screaming, having just strangled his own reflection. Chapter 5. Ambush at the Shattered Pass. The Shattered Pass lay like a wound carved into the earth, a jagged gash of obsidian cliffs and crumbling scree, haunted by old bones and older echoes. Wind howled through it like the screams of forgotten warriors, and the sky above hung low and leaden, cloaked in storm-racked clouds that flickered with silent green lightning. No birds flew here, no beast called, even the shadows crept with hesitation. It was the only viable route between the Boneroth Plateau and the Southern Blight, the artery through which House Varnix moved its siege engines and spell-forged weaponry. For days the convoy had trudged through the ravine, surrounded by towering cliffs and blind corners. Hundreds of wagons groaned beneath their weight, ironclads dragged by reptilian beasts, wagons of hex steel filled with volatile shadow bombs, and cages that trembled with chained monstrosities. Black-armored guards marched alongside them, their halberds etched with blood runes and their helms blank-faced and merciless. But the eyes that watched from above were older and hungrier. High above the ravine, hidden within the jagged maw of the cliffside, Draith assassins lay in wait, flesh-wrapped in cloaks of refracted shadow, their bodies painted in the blood of oracles for silence. Their leader, Shade General Vraxencool, observed the Varnix column through a lens made from the polished eye of a still-living demon. Every beat of the convoy was a rhythm he memorized. Formation density, beast handler rotations, scout intervals. They were slow, overconfident, fat with arcane pride. He clicked his tongue once. That was the signal. Below, from the rubble and sand, they emerged. The first shriek came not from a soldier, but from a cold one. A terrible, guttural screech as its handler was pulled into the earth, dragged down screaming by spined tendrils that burst from the ground like fleshy whips. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, painting the beast's flank, as its master's limbs flailed briefly above the surface before vanishing. Explosions followed, not of fire but absence. Silent detonation spheres hurled by Drelith warlocks imploded among the wagons, collapsing them inward like wet paper. Horses and handlers alike were crushed into singularities of bone and meat. One wagon folded so violently that the arcane reactor within it ruptured, releasing a blast of uncontained shadow fire that scoured 10 paces of terrain to molten slag. The Varnix guards rallied quickly, to their credit. Phalanxes snapped into position, halberds pointed outward, forming rings around the precious weapon carts and supply sigils. But their discipline meant nothing against what came next. From the cliffs, shade lancers leapt. They fell like living blades, armorless, gaunt and pale, their bodies wrapped in writhing leech silk. They struck with pinpoint violence, spearing down into the skulls of captains, lords, and mages with such force that the ground itself cracked. Blood geysered, screams bloomed, limbs flew. One Varnix war-prized was torn open from groin to throat mid-chant, her intestines flung into her own mouth by a laughing assassin before his blade severed her tongue and impaled her to a wagon axe. Archers returned fire, but the air betrayed them. Drelith's sorcery had warped the wind itself, curving every arrow off course, slamming missiles into allies, into rock, into the dirt. The Draith counter-volley came in black-fletched silence, barbed quarrels tipped in soulbane. Where they struck, flesh did not simply tear, it dissolved, leaving soldiers screaming with half-missing faces and arms reduced to dripping bone. At the center of the convoy, Varnic's commander Thale Draith stormed through the carnage, wielding twin scimitars forged from demon horns, roaring orders as his bodyguards died around him. He carved down 3 assassins in seconds, bisecting one from jaw to groin and setting another alight with a hexed strike. His left arm hung mangled, bleeding freely, but he did not slow. He reached the command cart and activated the sigil beacon, a towering column of cursed light meant to signal reinforcements. But the light never reached the sky. General Vexira dropped from above like a thunderbolt. He landed on Thale's back with a force that shattered vertebrae. His blade, a triple-edged needle saber poisoned with memory venom, sank into Thale's side and twisted. The commander bellowed, trying to turn, but Vexira was faster. He slid down the dying man's back and carved upward, splitting armor and torso alike, until he reached the ribs and yanked them apart with both hands. The beacon flickered, then died. By nightfall, the shattered pass was silent. The ground was slick with blood and churned flesh. Varnic's bodies lay in broken formations, many missing heads, hands, or organs. Fires flickered in the wreckage, lighting grotesque silhouettes of impaled wagons and shredded banners. A Varnic's beast handler crawled through the dirt, one leg missing, calling for his brother, only to be dragged into the darkness by something unseen. Atop the highest cliff, General Vexira watched it all, helmet removed, his face tattooed with the names of those he had killed today. He dipped his fingers into the blood pooled in his cupped palm, then smeared it across his brow. A ritual, a promise. This was no raid. This was the beginning. Chapter 6. Blades in the Dark. The war had not yet reached the cities, but it had already reached the bedchambers. The blade did not always march with the host. Sometimes it slithered beneath the door, unseen and smiling. In the weeks following the massacre at the Shattered Pass, a new tide of carnage swept across Naggaroth. It was not the thunder of battle lines clashing, nor the roar of war beasts breaking sieges. It was the soft sound, a rustle of silk, a click of lockpicks, the final breath before the blade kissed the neck. It was murder, and it did not sleep. The first to fall was Lord Rael Dracar, Varnic's spymaster, his name spoken with dread even in Malekith's court. He was found seated at his long table, still clutching a poisoned goblet that had never reached his lips. The real cause of death was far more intimate. The assassin had slipped in while he meditated, folding themselves into the shadow of a curtain, becoming less than air. When he opened his eyes, they slit his eyelids with a needle blade, blinding him instantly, then whispered every secret he had ever stolen back into his ears, each word laced with spells that shattered memory and seared his soul. When his servants entered at dawn, they found their master giggling and sucking on his own fingers, trying to eat his own tongue. His heart had been removed through his throat. Draith sent no message, none was needed, but Varnic's answered in kind. 3 days later, Lady Mevra Draith, cousin to Malric and matron of the Temple of the Final Gift, collapsed mid-ritual. Her skin turned black from the inside, her veins bursting outward in slow, pulsing rhythm. The sorceresses tried to cut the curse from her, only to find her blood had become sentient, writhing free from her arteries and attacking the others in sprays of acidic hatred. They locked her in a spell-sealed iron casket. When they opened it 2 days later, she was gone. Not vanished, but peeled. Her skin was nailed to the lid in a perfect map of Draith territory. Her bones were arranged like a spider's web. Her eyes had been left intact, positioned on the floor, still blinking. A single message was burned into the metal: the eye sees all. Then the killings escalated. Commanders began dying in their tents, throats slit by invisible hands. Watch captains burst into flames while inspecting supply lines, their bodies crawling with whisper worms that screamed in 20 languages. Courtiers were found headless, drowned in their own perfume baths. A noble's daughter, intended for a strategic marriage, vomited spiders at her engagement feast and tore out her own womb with her teeth before collapsing into convulsions. The fear began to rot the chain of command. Varnix officers started wearing iron masks and triple-layered neck guards to bed. Draith commanders refused to eat or drink anything not conjured before their eyes. Sentries executed any shadow that moved too quickly. Every creak of floorboards was a potential death sentence. Trust fractured like glass under boot. Even the war beasts suffered. One Varnix Dreadrider's Cold One turned on its handler after someone smeared a trace of Draith dream bile beneath its scales. The creature devoured its master in front of a full garrison before collapsing, its belly bursting with spectral parasites that hissed blasphemies in the voice of the murdered rider. Each death wasn't merely a loss, it was a message, a curse, a calculated terror designed to erode morale from within. Victories mattered less than the nightmares that followed them. But not every blade came from afar. Paranoia turned inward. Accusations bloomed like tumors. In Bloodspire Citadel, 5 Varnix officers were flayed alive by their own soldiers after a false whisper claimed they were leaking troop movements. Their screams echoed through the barracks, mixed with the cheers of a mob too terrified to consider innocence. In Drelith's court, an entire wing of the fortress was collapsed inwards after a scribe claimed to have seen a ghostly assassin pass through a mirror. 60 nobles were buried alive, entombed in obsidian, their last breaths choked by the dust of their own paranoia. Neither side could keep count anymore. The blades in the dark moved too fast, struck too deep. Assassins became wraiths. Saboteurs became legends. They did not need to win battles. They only needed to kill belief. And so as the war grew fat with blood, its heart began to starve from within, one cut, one whisper, one poisoned kiss at a time. Chapter 7. The siege begins. Bloodspire, the fortress city of House Varnix, stood like a blade driven into the heart of Naggaroth. Carved into the spine of the Wormbone Mountains, its towers spiraled like fangs into the storm-choked sky, each one bristling with jagged battlements and ensorcelled weaponry. Its walls were not built from stone, but from the fused bones of titanic sea leviathans, alchemically hardened to resist time, flame, and black lightning flickered endlessly above the city, drawn to the veins of metal that pulsed with arcane energy beneath its skin. It had never fallen. It was said that even Malekith once turned his armies away from Bloodspire, deeming it more trouble than conquest. And yet House Draith now came to break it. They came not as a legion, but as an avalanche. The horizon boiled with movement. Black banners, bearing the sigil of the flayed serpent, were whipped by shrieking winds. Hundreds of siege towers, shaped like screaming effigies, lumbered across the ashen plains, pulled by yoked monstrosities born in the black breeding pits beneath Clair-Carrond. Cold ones the size of temple spires, bred with manticore blood and stitched with arcane iron. Their roars cracked the sky. Behind them came the Drelith legions, disciplined ranks of blade slaves and death knights, armor etched with runes that wept ichor. Warlocks rode hovering discs of obsidian, hurling shrieking crows of flame that exploded mid-air into writhing faces that bit at the clouds. Chariots thundered across the plain, pulled by horned beasts with skin like living chainmail. And at the center of it all, mounted upon a beast of scale and shadow, stood Lord Malric Drelith. His armor had changed. No longer ceremonial. Now it was alive, bound to him by blood rites and murder. It pulsed in rhythm with the artifact's call, each heartbeat making the shadows around him twist and recoil. He held Naltir, his blade of soul glass, now thrumming with the essences of a dozen slain seers. The runes on its hilt chattered softly, eager for fresh meat. He raised one gauntleted hand. The army halted. From the battlements, Varnic's defenders looked down with grim silence. Ballistae as large as ships rotated into place, aimed at the enemy lines. Warlocks lined the parapets, their hands dripping with eldritch fire. Shadow glass cannons were uncovered, calibrated to fire shards of distilled nightmare into the hearts of enemy formations. And at the highest tower, veiled in smoke and wreathed in dark tendrils, stood Vexira Varnix, the bearer of the heart. She watched through a crystalline scrying lens as Malric dismounted. He stepped forward alone, through the no-man's land of ash and blood-slick stone. At the midpoint he paused. A black iron gong was hammered beside him by a twisted servant missing its tongue and fingers. The sound it made was not of metal but of grief, a deep, resonant thrum that made bones ache and eyes bleed tears. A signal. Then, all at once, the siege began. The Draith lines surged forward, the siege towers howling with caged spirits as they advanced. Sorcerers on both sides loosed hell. Fire met shadow, lightning met poison. The sky cracked apart like rotten bark, and blood began to rain. Ballista bolts the size of trees impaled the front ranks of Drelith's forces, skewering beasts and riders alike. One siege engine exploded into flaming ruin as a barrage of nightmare glass shredded it mid-march, its crew torn into ribbons that spun in the wind like streamers. But they did not stop. At the base of Bloodspire's walls, monstrous cold ones slammed into the gates with the force of falling mountains. Their mouths belched black flame, melting steel and bone. One beast climbed the walls, digging into the bones with its clawed limbs, dragging a siege tower behind it like a spider dragging prey. Draith's saboteurs reached the lower defenses, planting crystal bombs that inverted gravity. Entire sections of wall buckled as stone tore itself apart, chunks floating upward before collapsing back down in jagged storms of shrapnel and gore. Varnic's defenders countered with unrelenting ferocity. Swarms of winged constructs, bone hawks forged from soul steel, dove into the ranks, exploding in bursts of psychic pain. Warlocks unleashed soul burns, lighting up the field with flares that consumed flesh but left armor untouched, leaving empty suits standing amidst clouds of ash. And high above, Vexira extended her arms. The heart responded. Reality rippled. From her tower, tendrils of shadow stretched forth, not mere sorcery, but will, manifest and cruel. They slithered across the battlefield, burrowing into enemy ranks, dragging men into crevices that hadn't existed a moment before. A battalion of Draith elites suddenly vanished, their bodies turned into flat silhouettes, pressed into the ground like shadows, screaming silently from within the stone. Lord Malric laughed. He raised Naltir to the sky, and called upon his own magic, his pact with the black coil. A storm of knives descended. Not physical, not visible, but inevitable. Varnic's mages shrieked as their tongues were shredded in their mouths, their thoughts sliced open by impossible blades. One sorceress exploded, her body twisting into a spiral of bone and flame. A captain's helm split down the middle as a cut appeared across his skull, so sharp it took his brain a second to realize it was dead. Still the walls held. But barely. At the western gate, a cold one broke through. Behind it, Drelith's first assault wave surged forward, executioners with curved glaives, laughing as they carved through the gate defenders in a tide of crimson. One warrior impaled 3 Varnix guards on a single strike, then used their stacked corpses as a battering ram to push further in. The city's streets were about to become a slaughterhouse. Bloodspire had withstood centuries of rebellion, invasion, and siege. But never this. Not Malric. Not the Heart. Not war unleashed. Chapter 8. The Betrayer's Arrow. General Isarith Kael was known as the Iron Fang, not for her unyielding armor, but for her iron resolve and the fang-shaped scar etched across her left cheek, earned when she bit the throat from a treacherous mercenary during the Ashvest Rebellion. She was not merely Varnix's most lethal tactician, she was feared, even within her own ranks. It was said she never slept, that her blade never cooled, and that she once had a dream so terrible it begged her to forget it, so she carved it into her armor instead. And yet she died, alone, betrayed. The final hour of Dysfjord's life was soaked in tension. The siege had reached its 3rd day. Draith forces had begun to claw deeper into Bloodspire's outer wards, and cracks had formed in what was once unbreakable stone, both literal and political. Supplies were thinning, faith was fraying, the Heart of Ulgu burned brighter with each hour, and Vexira's demands grew increasingly erratic. Isarith had argued with the Mitron just hours before, in front of the High Council no less. "You let the thing guide your war," she spat, voice echoing through the obsidian chamber. "It is not your throne, it is a parasite." Vexira had smiled then, slowly, cruelly. "And yet it speaks to me, Isarith, and the throne does not speak to you." That was when Isarith knew her time was numbered. But she did not expect it to come from behind. That evening, Isarith retreated to her command sanctum, a vaulted tower chamber lined with bone map scrolls, war figurines, and blood ink reports. The walls bore scars from old duels, old victories, and older secrets. She stood alone in its heart, stripped of armor save for her bracers and a thin silk shirt stained with sweat and grime. At her side knelt her second-in-command, Veanil Sarg. Veanil, the Quiet One, the orphan she had plucked from the pits of the Moontide Arena, the boy she'd raised into a killer, the man she'd entrusted with her life more times than she could count. She had taught him to read war-like poetry, to kill like prayer. And it was he who drew the bowstring. It was from behind her. The arrow was black, fletched with crow feathers soaked in whisperbane. It made no sound as it loosed. No whistle, no air displacement, just a silent flicker through the dim candlelight. It pierced her through the spine, between her ribs, sliding beneath her heart and up through her throat, bursting from her mouth in a wet crack of cartilage and gore. Her gasp was a strangled wheeze, her hands clawing at the wound with instinctive panic, blood pouring down her front like spilt wine. She turned, saw him, eyes full of confusion, hurt, and something worse. Realization. Veanil stood frozen, the bow still in his hands, his face pale and unreadable. He started. She tried to speak, but the arrowhead had shredded her tongue from behind. Blood gurgled over her lips. She stumbled backward, knocking over a war table, collapsing into a pile of spiked armor and shattered plans. Veanil dropped the bow. He ran to her, dropping to his knees, arms shaking. His eyes were wet. "The body made me." He pressed his forehead to hers as she convulsed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I saw them in the mirror for days. Whispers, dreams. They showed me what happens if I didn't." His chair's eyes, glassing over, narrowed, and she drove her thumb into his eye socket. He screamed, falling back, clutching his face, blood and vitreous fluid gushing between his fingers. His shriek echoed down the tower. But no one came. Izith crawled, dragging herself across broken stone and spilled maps, blood trailing behind like a desecrated banner. Her fingers reached for a dagger half hidden beneath a fallen tome. She didn't make it. Vanel, blind in one eye and sobbing like a broken child, stumbled forward. He picked up the dagger first, and with a panicked grunt he drove it into her back. Again, 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 until her twitching stopped, until the iron fang was no more. By dawn, the story was already circulating. Ezirith murdered by a Draith agent, poisoned, exploded by hexfire, dragged into the shadows by wraith beasts. The truth was simpler. The truth was an arrow and a whisper. In a locked chest beneath Vanel's bunk, a Draith cipherstone pulsed once more, satisfied. One more piece off the board. One more ghost added to the war. Chapter 9. The Ritual Unleashed. There was a night in the history of Naggaroth that was never recorded, not because it was forgotten, but because those who witnessed it were never able to speak again. Their tongues blackened, their minds unspooled like thread from a spindle, their shadows refused to follow them. F and BHY, strong. This was that night. Within the summit of the obsidian citadel, Vexira Varnix stood alone before the Heart of Ulgu, encased in a sanctum of void glass and sigil-scribed walls that pulsed like living flesh. Her skin no longer resembled anything mortal. Veins of shadow ran beneath her translucent armor, and her breath misted with a faint violet shimmer. Her eyes were gone, replaced by smooth black opals that shimmered with writhing echoes of things that had no names. Around her, 12 high priestesses knelt in a circle, each bound by thorned wire that pierced their chests, mouths, and thighs, sacrifices kept alive for the climax. Their prayers were not spoken, they were bled into the air, each chant drawn from open wounds and channeled into the heart's pulsing core. Outside the tower, the battle for Bloodspire raged. Walls cracked, towers bled. Draith war machines screamed as they dragged their engines through the ash-choked city. Civilians and soldiers alike were dragged screaming into the streets, trampled beneath claw and hoof. Even as Varnix's forces held fast in the higher wards, their foundation was crumbling. But Vexira did not look to the battlefield. She looked inward, and she opened the heart. Vexira whispered the final phrase, not in any language of gods or men, but in the negative of sound. An anti-chant, a subtraction of reality itself. And the heart answered. It beat once, and the tower vanished. Not crumbled, not destroyed. Simply ceased to be. For an instant, those outside the sanctum, generals, guards, even Draith siege watchers, saw the entire apex of the obsidian citadel flicker and collapse into itself like a dying star. A sphere of negative light consumed it, then exploded outward in utter silence. The shock wave rolled down the mountain like a curse given form. Streets cracked open and screamed, not in sound but in meaning. Buildings howled, wept, and bled shadow. The sky split down the middle like an old scar, and stars bled from the wound. Varnix and Draith alike were thrown into the air, their bodies shredded by unseen vectors, their shadows ripped from them, flailing as they were dragged into the void. The city twisted, quite literally. Bloodspire's geometry convulsed, angles bent, streets folded back onto themselves like loops of intestine. A man stepped off one battlement and landed in the middle of a dining hall, now somehow rotated vertically. A squad of Draith raiders stormed into a corridor that elongated endlessly as they ran, their footfalls never echoing, their voices vanishing into nothing. Essavant slapped the block over, smiling, dazed with happiness, expansive. Some walls pulsed like lungs. Others grew eyes. The corpses of the 12 priestesses in the sanctum screamed in unison as their souls were devoured, not destroyed, but recycled into the heart, their bodies crumbled to salt and teeth. And Vexira rose into the air, her arms spread, shadow pouring from her every orifice. The ritual was complete. Below, in the chaos, Malric Draith stood upon a tower shattered by the blast, his face streaked with blood, hair tangled with ash. He saw the city warping, the laws of reality breaking. He watched as one of his commanders screamed and turned inside out, their skeleton erupting from their mouth while their skin draped backward over their armor like a cape. He saw the sky blink, and for a moment the heavens looked back. And he knew Vexira had merged completely with the artifact. No longer mortal, no longer elven. She was now the will of Ulgu, a living rift. The next morning never came. Time fractured. The sun tried to rise and failed. It flickered on the horizon like a candle trapped in a mirror maze. And atop the tower of what was once Bloodspire, now a throne of writhing black stone, Vexira sat, not upon a seat, but upon possibility, her body a silhouette of shifting limbs and dark wings. The war was no longer a battle for land or pride. It was now a war against reality itself. Chapter 10. The Broken Gates. The gates of Bloodspire were never meant to fall. They were shaped from the ribs of the drowned titan Shalthor, enchanted with warding runes carved from the tongue bones of dead gods, and bound by molten soul steel forged in the screaming furnaces beneath the black altar. They had stood for 7 centuries, untouched by siege, fire, or fate. But they had never faced the full wrath of House Draith. By the 6th day of the siege, the sky had lost all color. Ash and shadow blanketed the heavens like a funeral shroud, and Bloodspire itself groaned like a living thing under pressure. The very earth trembled with the weight of impending doom. Fires raged across the lower districts, devouring temples and barracks alike, and the city's defenders were growing desperate, their bodies haggard, their magic drained, their eyes glassy from the nightly screams that now echoed inside their skulls. Lord Malric Draith stood atop the command ridge outside the main wall, his armor soaked in ichor and layered in the scorched remains of dozens of slain Varnic's officers. Around him rose siege constructs unlike anything Naggaroth had ever borne, ravagers of flesh-wrought will, grotesque machines made of bone, hex steel, and enslaved sorcery. They marched on 12 limbs, dragging themselves across the blood mud with tentacles of iron sinew. Mounted atop them were Draith sorcerers, their mouths sewn shut to better channel pure willpower into destruction. At Malric's signal, they advanced. The first blow came, not from a battering ram, but from sound. One of the siege engines, the Shrike Maw, loosed a pulse of compressed sorrow, a scream pulled from the lungs of a dying oracle and weaponized into a resonant curse. The air tore in two, a shriek so violent it shattered the warding runes lining the gate's inner arch. Guards on the battlements bled from their ears and eyes. Some turned on each other, clawing at their own faces in panic. One jumped from the walls, headfirst, laughing until his skull burst against the stone. Then the ramps moved forward, not of wood, but of living bone. Each was a chimera of monstrous skulls fused into a massive, breathing spine, its jaws opening with every strike, vomiting corrosive bile onto the gate. Their impact shook the fortress like thunder made flesh. Bloodspire's defenders retaliated with everything. Soul flares fired beams of anti-light that disintegrated entire siege towers. Cauldrons of cursed pitch were poured onto the attackers, black tar that clung to flesh and soul, burning the spirit out before the body. Varnic's assassins leapt from the towers, dancing through the chaos, blades flashing, leaving trails of crimson and shriveled hearts in their wake. But the Draith press was unrelenting. The ground cracked. The air stank of ozone and rot. Thunder rolled as Malric himself descended into the fray, atop his obsidian wyvern, Tharkul the Nine-Eyed, whose tail bore scorpion stingers the size of lances. He crashed down upon the inner courtyard, smashing defenders aside like scattered dolls. His glaive spun, severing torsos, cracking helms, and leaving trails of spectral flame in its wake. Avarnic's warlord charged him, clad in enchanted mirror mail, bearing a glaive wrapped in banshee hair. She struck thrice. Malric parried once, and in that one stroke he sliced her body in 3 perfect pieces, head, torso, and legs falling in sequence, still twitching, blood arcing in an impossible spiral before drenching the stones beneath. Atop the wall, the final defenders chanted last rites. A wounded sorcerer, teeth shattered and arms burned to bone, began the incantation of the city's last gate binding, a suicidal curse that would collapse the gate and crush anything in its wake. But the heart had warped the air. The syllables turned inside out. His lungs ruptured. The air around him boiled. His body convulsed into a sphere of flesh, imploded, and then exploded into a red mist that rained down on those beside him. And then the gate broke. With one final blow, a direct channeling of Malric's will through the Nal Tir. The gate screamed and burst, shattered into millions of shards that flew outward like shrapnel. Each shard carried a fragment of hatred, slicing through soldiers, beasts, and stone. One Varnic's battalion was turned into a red smear in seconds, their armor folding inward, their lungs liquefied by the force of the blow. The way was open. The Draith army surged forward with the fury of the damned. Screaming death knights rode scorpion steeds. Chain mages hurled nets of razored sinew that flayed the flesh from any caught within. The eaters of the pale moon, cannibal berserkers bound in screaming runeskins, leapt upon walls and tore defenders apart with their bare hands, devouring organs while the bodies still twitched. Bloodspire's outer district became a cathedral of slaughter. Children were trampled in the mud. Civilians begged for mercy that did not exist. Bodies were hung from inverted banners. A butcher's square was repurposed as a pyre. Piles of dead were set alight, creating towers of ash that choked the lungs of the dying. And above it all, Vexira watched, impassive, unblinking, her silhouette wreathed in the tendrils of the heart. She did not stop it. She let it happen. Because the deeper the pain, the darker the shadow. And the darker the shadow, the stronger she became. Chapter 11. The Duel of Matrons. Smoke twisted through the burning spires of Bloodspire's central tier, winding like serpents around shattered statues and toppled obelisks. Blood soaked the stonework streets, flowing in rivulets down the stepped avenues like sacrificial offerings. Above it all, the shrieks of dying citizens echoed, not with the chaos of war, but the rhythm of ritual. In the ruined amphitheater of the Hall of Echoes, once a site of judgment and public executions, 2 figures faced each other beneath a cracked dome of shadow glass. Fire flickered in the void between them, and the world seemed to hush, as if Naggaroth itself were holding its breath. Xari Varnix, daughter of Vexira, first of the Shadowborn, slayer of the Red Courts, stood bare-armed and blood-slick, her armor reduced to ritual bindings of soul-steel and shadow-thrend. Her glaive, Whisperfang, shimmered with living runes that whispered the names of those it had slain endlessly, like a dirge whispered by crows. Across from her stood Sereth Drelleth, heir of Malric, born from pain and tempered in cruelty. His armor was carved from the flayed hides of rival nobles, each stitch a name erased from history. His blade, Virakul, was a curved monolith of dark iron, pulsing with the soul of a bound daemon whose hatred radiated like heat. This was no battlefield. This was vengeance incarnate. They did not speak. He charged. The first clash sent shockwaves through the dome, cracking ancient support pillars. Whisperfang met Virakul in an eruption of shadow fire and steel song. Isari's form was a blur, a dancer of death, each strike a poem of precision, her glaive spinning in figure eights that left trails of slicing wind. Sereth answered with brute force, every swing of Virakul a continent cracking, each strike leaving scars in the floor. He smashed aside her thrusts, parried with his gauntlet, and retaliated with bone-breaking kicks. Where she flowed, he shattered. Where she pierced, he tore. She spun low, severing the tendons in his knee. He howled and retaliated with a backhand that shattered her collarbone, sending her spinning through a column. Blood fountained from her mouth. But she stood, laughing. He clashed again. This time, Isari fainted, spinning her glaive in a crescent before leaping into a vaulting arc. Her foot connected with Sereth's jaw, spinning him half a circle. Before he could recover, she slammed the haft of her weapon into his ribs, cracking armor, then drove the blade forward into his gut. He roared, grabbed the glaive still embedded in him, and pulled it deeper, dragging her forward with it. His forehead smashed into hers once, twice, and blood sprayed from her brow. He drove his elbow into her throat, lifted her bodily, and hurled her across the arena. She landed hard, bones crunching, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. But she stood. She always stood. "You bleed well," Sereth finally snarled, voice thick with venom. "So will you," she rasped, and spat blood to the side. They charged one last time, blades flashing, bodies broken, but spirits ablaze with hatred and legacy. Each knew what was at stake. This was not just about power, not just about war. This was who would be remembered. Isari ducked beneath a swing meant to cleave her head, slid forward, and drove Whisperfang into Sereth's thigh, not to cripple, but to anchor. She used the leverage to launch herself up, onto his chestplate, blade discarded, and drew a concealed dagger from her braid, a sliver of heart glass blessed in her own blood. She drove it into his eye. Sereth screamed, a sound that cracked the air, and staggered backward, blood and fire gushing from the socket. But he was not finished. With one eye blind and rage boiling, he seized her by the throat and slammed her into the ground. Once, twice, a third time. Bones shattered, her spine bent at angles it was never meant to. She coughed blood and tried to speak, but all that came out was the sound of broken hope. And then he raised Virakul, but her fingers closed around her glaive. With the last of her strength, she swung upward, not to kill, but to sever. Her blade sliced across his left arm, cleaving it from elbow to wrist, and Virakul clattered to the stone, hissing like a wounded serpent. Both collapsed, breathing, dying, leaving. Neither moved as Draith forces stormed the upper tier. Neither called for help as Varnic's warlocks descended from the walls. All eyes fell upon the two heirs, broken, bloodied, and silent. And the silence said everything. There were no victors, only survivors. Chapter 12. The Beast Unleashed. The battle for Bloodspire had become a nightmare. Buildings bled shadow. The air buzzed with the scent of scorched flesh and ruptured spell words. Streets once paved with obsidian now lay fractured, clawed open by siege engines and death beasts. Everywhere, the cries of the dying mingled with the hissing of warp-scorched steel. The upper tiers had held longer than any had expected, their defenders maddened, desperate, driven to bloodlust by the endless screams of their ancestors echoing from the heart. But with the city's outer defenses crumbling, Varnic's forces were being pushed back inch by inch, street by street, beneath the crushing weight of the Draith warhost. And in the heart of it all, inside the shattered bones of a broken ziggurat once used for heretical ceremonies, something shifted. General Wraith of the Draith advance column, stood at the edge of a courtyard drenched in steaming gore, his glaive dripping with viscera, his armor splashed in the black ichor of slain sorcerers. Behind him, his troops pressed forward through a broken gate, cheering with each hacked-down defender, unaware that beneath their boots the stones trembled. Beneath them was the pit, the last refuge of Varnix's darkest weapons. The maw cage. The ground cracked. The screams that followed did not sound human or elven. They were ancient, primal, the voice of something born before cruelty had a name. Stone exploded upward, throwing Draith troops in all directions, limbs flailing as they were impaled by splinters or crushed beneath rubble. A towering cage, shaped from rune-etched bone, burst from beneath the courtyard floor. Its bars were warped, torn outward from within, as if something had grown too large or too angry for its prison. And then it roared. The manticore of House Varnix, bred in the pits beneath the Tower of Black Teeth, unleashed for the first time in a century. It was no mere beast. It was a cataclysm. Massive, easily the size of a siege tower, its wings were torn and jagged, veined with red lightning. Its fur was patchy, torn where enchantments had burned themselves into the muscle. Its scorpion tail lashed with a mind of its own, the tip dripping a venom that sizzled the stone beneath. Rows of mismatched teeth jutted from a maw that opened too wide, stretching far beyond natural limits. Its eyes were blind, long since cut away as punishment for previous rampages. Yet it saw with scent and sound, with magic and madness. And it hated everything. The first Draith squad died before they could scream. The manticore pounced, its forelimbs slamming into the street and pulverizing 6 knights to pulp. One rider tried to flee. The beast caught him mid-air with a snap of its jaws, swallowing him whole and still crunching. His legs kicked once from between its teeth, before vanishing into a rain of crimson mist. A warlock attempted to banish it with a sigil of binding. The beast inhaled and screamed, not a sound, but a shockwave. The sorcerer's body detonated mid-incantation, his lungs bursting outward, his ribcage everted like a bloody flower. The beast turned and leapt, wings flaring. It slammed into a Draith chariot column with such force that the vehicles exploded into splinters. The beasts pulling them fled, only to be impaled by the manticore's tail, which skewered 3 in a single jab. Panicked soldiers broke ranks. Commands were lost in the chaos. The manticore reared, roaring so loud the very stones fractured beneath its feet. Buildings shook. Statues toppled. It smashed a watchtower with a single swipe, sending defenders tumbling like dolls into the street. It chased the survivors into alleys, rending through stone and body alike, devouring them in mangled swipes. One soldier's helmeted head was torn clean off, still blinking as it was flung across a blood-slick wall. For a brief, breathless moment, Varnix's forces surged. Their champions screamed war chants, archers loosed volleys into broken formations. Wounded defenders found renewed strength in the carnage. Varnix war witches conjured shadow beasts from the dying light, swarming the flanks of the Draith assault. The tide turned briefly, but Malak Draith had anticipated this. From the skies, his personal guard descended. Sorcerers riding chariots made of bone and fire. Executioners wielding void cleavers, and above them all, his shadow flame worm, Exarithul, winged with hatred and forged from nightmare. And with a word of power he descended into the chaos and met the beast head-on. The manticore roared. Malric didn't flinch. He raised Naltir and spoke its true name, bound into the Heart of Ulgu long before the war began. The manticore screamed. Not in defiance, in recognition. It charged, and Melric, with a single devastating arc of his blade, unmade its name. The magic binding the beast shattered, Its limbs convulsed, muscles spasmed, wings snapped backward like broken flags, its eyes wept blood, its scream turned inward, its throat collapsing into itself. It collapsed, a quake of finality. Its body did not bleed. It melted into ash and steam. The tide turned again, but this time for good. And the beast that had given Varnix a heartbeat of hope was reduced to dust, smeared across stone, forgotten before it finished dying. Chapter 13. The Price of Sorcery. The Heart of Ulgu pulsed like a tumor in the sky, suspended above Bloodspire's highest tower, no longer held in Vexira's breast, but outside her now, orbiting her like a black sun. Its glow had become erratic, its rhythm discordant. It no longer merely shimmered, it howled in silence, vibrating with a madness that cracked mirrors and bled the eyes of seers who dared look upon it too long. And Vexira was changing. She had not spoken in 3 days, yet her commands were still obeyed. Not through voice, her presence alone dictated reality. Where once she walked as a queen, now she hovered inches above the ground, toes blackened and curled as if frostbitten, trailing gossamer strands of whispering shadow. Her hair had turned into a tangle of void silk, drifting and weaving of its own will, like living ink. Her skin no longer bled when cut. It whispered. Those near her began to lose their names. Her inner circle, once a cadre of the most vicious minds in Varnix, began to unravel, minds fraying like parchment left in the rain. High Chancellor Valian sliced out his own tongue and replaced it with a serpent, which he claimed spoke the truths Vexira no longer needed to. Mistress Hadra, chief diviner, clawed her own face into a ruin after seeing her future reflected in Vexira's eyes, a future where she served as furniture in a court made of suffering. In the Grand Hall, the ministers argued amongst themselves about troop placements, retreat strategies, the impossible geometry unfolding across the upper city. But their words turned to sand in their mouths, for Vexira's will leaked into the walls. She had become a gravity, and all minds were drawn to her. One night, during a war council, a noble interrupted her silence with a plea to evacuate civilians. He got no reply. He pressed again, his voice cracking, sweat beading. She turned her gaze upon him. The man folded, bones inverted, skin ruptured, and his body crumpled into a sculpture of flesh. Still alive, still aware, his mouth locked into a silent scream, eyes spinning wildly in a head that no longer had a neck. No one spoke again for the rest of the night. The heart pulsed louder now. Its magic had seeped beyond control. It bled through stone. Streets warped beneath it. Bloodspire's towers had begun to twist skyward like blackthorns drawn to its pull. Time inside the fortress had begun to loop. A servant boiled alive by a miscast spell was found preparing dinner the next morning, confused but whole. A guard posted on the eastern wall claimed to see the same sunset 3 nights in a row. Some parts of the city were stuck, frozen in moments of unbearable pain. A courtyard littered with dead children simply never moved. The flies circled but never landed. The blood never dried. And then came the dreams. Every courtier, every guard, every slave began to dream of her not as Vexira, but as a many-armed deity of shadow and hunger. In the dreams, she had no face, only mouths, each whispering a different truth. They woke screaming, bleeding from their ears and eyes, convinced they had spoken to the future. One threw himself from a tower, clawing at his brain with both hands. Another removed his eyelids and begged to be blinded further. A third simply stood silent for hours until his body cracked open like an egg, releasing nothing but a scream that echoed through the fortress for an entire day without fading. Even her daughters, her blood, were not spared. Isari, broken and recovering from her duel with Sareth, awoke to find her bedchamber shifting. The walls pulsed, the ceiling sagged. Her sheets were made of screaming mouths. Her own reflection, in a mirror she hadn't summoned, asked her if she remembered how many siblings she'd eaten in the womb. She didn't. She sought her mother for comfort. What she found was Vexira sending. Floating in the eye chamber, surrounded by a dozen levitating corpses, each a court sorcerer who had tried to bind the heart's radiance. Their skulls had been hollowed and refilled with insects. Their blood was dancing in the air, painting patterns that made Izari's teeth ache just to look at. Vexira turned her head. Slowly, her mouth did not move, but her voice boomed within Izari's mind, like thunder through wet stone. You were not born, Izari. You were written. I am unwriting you. Izari fled, weeping, screaming, bleeding from her nose. She did not remember the path back. She did not remember her name. The court of Varnix had become a cathedral of lunacy. Its nobles, once sharp and venomous, now shuffled like inmates in a dying asylum, praying to a goddess that no longer remembered they were worshippers. The heart throbbed. The city wept. And Vexira, once a matron, once a mother, once mortal, stood at the center of it all, no longer a queen. Now merely a vessel for something far, far worse. Chapter 14. Alliance Fractures. The siege had lasted over 2 weeks. What had begun as a storm of discipline and coordinated wrath had devolved into a fever dream of greed, suspicion, and open bloodshed. The Draith alliance, once held together by promises of spoils, vengeance, and the absolute authority of Malric's iron command, now groaned under the weight of its own ambition. The longer they remained in the cursed shadow of Bloodspire, now reshaped by the Heart of Ulgu into a nightmare citadel, the more unity frayed like a corpse-stitched banner in a hurricane. The first crack came at the bone halls of the gilded Maw Corsairs. Captain Livrus, sea raider of the Blighted Coast, had dragged a siege engine into the ruins of Bloodspire's eastern quarter and repurposed the charred remains of a temple into a storage chamber. Within it, his corsairs hoarded barrels of blood wine, crates of soul shards, and entire display racks of severed heads, still humming with residual magic. Each one, he claimed, had once belonged to a Varnix noble. The Draith command demanded the contents be distributed according to war chits and accord packs. Livrus responded by nailing a Draith quartermaster to the wall of the temple, through the mouth, tongue split in half, eyes gouged out and replaced with sharpened coins. By dawn, 20 Draith soldiers had been found, flayed, and dumped in a pile just outside the eastern trenches. Their skin had been carefully cut into the shape of sails. Livrus flew them from his battlements. Further north, within the warlock encampments, Arcanist Vihalion declared himself the rightful claimant of the upper tiers. "We are the wielders of annihilation," he preached, flanked by his acolytes who had long since abandoned mortal names. "The blood spillers are tools, we are the flame." He sealed his argument by incinerating a platoon of mercenaries in their sleep, reducing their tents and organs to whirling columns of ash. Their screams were bound into bottled glass spheres, which he hung from the branches of dead trees as warning chimes. In response, Varkul's Ironclad, a company of armor-clad sellswords led by the cyclopean brute known as the Red Butcher, stormed Vihalion's camp. They found the warlocks waiting. The battle that followed did not resemble war. It was slaughter painted with madness. The ground cracked and screamed as eldritch fire clashed with rusted axes. One ironclad's head inflated to the size of a wagon before bursting in a cloud of bone shards and crawling insects. A warlock's flesh turned into mercury mid-incantation, and he melted into a puddle that burned through 3 layers of armor. Varkul himself was found days later, alive, with his torso sewn to his own lower jaw, his internal organs forming an obscene puppet that chattered prophecies in a child's voice until it was silenced with fire. In the central quarter, Druhan's gutter wolves, infamous street scum turned elite skirmishers, began taking hostages from other Draith units, demanding bribes of flesh, coin, and women in exchange for safe passage. When refused, they began harvesting. The Bastion commanders discovered this too late, when one of their own supply officers returned strapped with cursed explosives, sewn into his flesh by rune wives forced into service. He detonated in the middle of a war council, killing 3 officers and blinding a dozen others with molten bone. That night, retaliation came. A Draith execution cadre, sanctioned by Malric himself, descended upon the gutter wolves like wraiths with flensing blades. The screams echoed through the camp for hours. When dawn broke, the gutter wolves' entire compound had been emptied, every man, woman, and beast inside flayed and hung from their own makeshift scaffolding. Their leader was found alive, nailed to an altar by his own intestines, muttering the words, "It sees us now," over and over until his mind finally cracked and his skull caved in from internal pressure. Maric knew. He saw the reports, the treason, the butchery, the chaos unbound. He stood atop his command spire, watching the fires within his own camp blaze higher than those in Bloodspire's wards. And he did nothing, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. "This is the fire that tempers true loyalty," he said to his generals. "Let the weak devour one another. Only the ruthless may walk beside me when we claim the heart." But the heart had already begun its work. Its shadow reached even here. Mercenaries who drank from the wells of Bloodspire began to change. Some grew silent. Some began to speak backwards. One carved the same word into his face over and over, Vexira, unaware of its meaning, unable to stop, until there was no more skin left to carve. The unity of the Draith alliance had turned from a spearhead into a feeding frenzy. No longer brothers in arms, now only rivals in blood. And Bloodspire, watching, twisting, laughing, waited for them to tear each other apart. Chapter 15. The Fall of Bloodspire. There is no word in the Eltaran tongue for what happened to Bloodspire. No scroll in the Black Library, no prophecy inked in daemon blood, no utterance from the lips of a dying god could have described the end of that place. Because Bloodspire did not fall, it was unmade. The final dawn never came. Instead, the sky above Bloodspire bled shadow. Stars blinked out one by one, not from cloud or storm, but because the sky had begun to rot. A spreading blight of unreality devoured the firmament, like flame devours parchment. The sun rose twisted and wrong, casting light that flowed sideways and flickered like dying torch flame under water. And above the city, the Heart of Ulgu screamed. It did not make sound. It emitted absence. A scream so voided of reality, it tore the fabric between breath and thought. Sorcerers in both camps convulsed in silence, their spells unraveling into streams of shrieking light. Some exploded without a sound, turned inside out, their shadows left frozen in final moments of agony on the walls. Atop her obsidian throne Vexira floated, limbs spread like a crucified goddess, tendrils of the heart wrapped through her spine, her veins, her soul. Her eyes had gone entirely black. Her skin shimmered like oil upon water. She no longer wept, laughed, or even breathed. She simply was, and the heart had no more need for a vessel. They opened. The veil between realms tore like wet silk. Above Bloodspire, a gash split the sky, wide, endless, hungry. Through it came nothing living, no demons, no armies of chaos, no beasts. What came was Ulgu itself, raw shadow given thought, emotion without boundary, madness without shape. Buildings melted as the laws of mass and gravity were rewritten. Soldiers floated screaming into the sky and never stopped ascending. Rivers flowed uphill, then backward, then into themselves, folding the city's canals into recursive loops. One entire district became a mirror, every surface reflecting alternate deaths of those who passed through it. The bell of mourning, a relic said to only chime at the death of a royal bloodline, began to ring of its own accord. The sound turned bone to dust and shattered every window in the city. People bled from their pores. Their teeth fell out as their bodies tried to scream through every orifice. The Draith army, still fractured and bloodthirsty, could not comprehend what they faced. The streets they conquered no longer existed. Soldiers stepped through doorways and found themselves walking out of their own mouths. Blades turned to ash mid-swing. Fires burned without heat, and ice screamed. One commander vomited a version of himself that tried to strangle him, while another dissolved into a puddle of tongues chanting Vexira's name in a dozen dialects. Malric Draith, high upon his war-beast Zarethul, beheld the end with a face of stone. He watched as his remaining generals were pulled into spirals of unreality, their bodies warping into fractals of pain. He tried to reach the heart, tried to mount a final assault on the tower. But the city itself rebelled. Bloodspires turned inward, roads curled, towers bent like knees. The city folded upon itself, becoming an endless labyrinth of death and shadow. War beasts rampaged blindly, impaling allies. Constructs melted into pools of language that tried to climb. Sorcerers wept their own souls through their eye sockets. And through it all, Vexira sang, a wordless hymn that shook reality. She was no longer queen, nor mother, nor elf. She had become the heart. Then the second pulse came. It rolled outward from the tower like a wave, not of force, but of forgetting. Where it passed, names vanished. Memory was scoured, maps unraveled. Entire battalions blinked from existence, not killed, not slain, but unwritten. Their banners left behind, fluttering in wind that no longer blew. Their screams echoed in ears that no longer remembered them. By nightfall, only the ruin remained. Bloodspire, once the jewel of the north, the unbreakable bastion of Varnic's pride, was a crater of glass and bone. The land around it had warped into a spiral of ash. Time bent. No birds flew above, no wind stirred. Only the echo of her name, Vexira, remained, repeating from broken mouths buried deep beneath rubble. Of the Draith host, only a fragment remained, leaderless, deranged, weeping blood as they wandered the ashen ring where a city had stood. And somewhere in the center, where no one dared look, the heart pulsed, waiting, breathing, alive. Chapter 16. The Unmaking of Malric. He rode alone. Zarethul, his shadow flame worm, tore through the corrupted skies above the ruin that had once been Bloodspire, now a warped wound in the earth, a spiraling scar of ash and melted bone. Black lightning forked across the heavens. Torn veils between realms wept ichor. Voices spoke in tongues not meant for living ears. But Malric Draith rode unshaken. His armor had fused with his flesh, charred by the eldritch fires of his own warlocks, sealed in place by rune torment and hatred. Each step of his mount brought cracks of thunder and arcs of void fire. His blade, Nailtear, pulsed like a second heart, eager for the strike. He had come for Vexira, to end her, not for vengeance, not for victory, but because nothing else remained. The crater opened before him like a mouth, and at its heart she floated. Vexira, no longer recognizable as elf, nor queen, nor mother, her form twisted with the sinuous grace of a spectre, draped in robes of unraveling shadow. Her eyes, once cruel and calculating, now bore the stillness of eternity. She did not float. She hovered in a state between dimensions, tendrils of thought extending from her skull like the branches of a dying tree. The Heart of Ulgu orbited her like a satellite of madness, beating slow and deep, its pulses echoing across all realities. It shed no light, but shadow fire, flame that hissed, curled, and extinguished memory as it touched the earth. Malric dismounted and stepped forward across the cracked obsidian plateau. With each stride his armor whispered screams, the trapped souls of every Draith he had sacrificed to reach this moment. "You," he said. Her gaze shifted, not to him, but through him. His blood began to boil. "You destroyed everything," he growled, spitting. "Your house, mine, the city, the world." Still no answer. He raised Naltir, its edge wreathed in the spectral flames of 1,000 slain kings. "You're no god," he snarled, "just a whore with a relic." Vexira blinked, and the heart responded. Reality bent. Malric's feet slid as the ground around him warped, becoming slick with writhing faces, all his own, each one screaming a different moment of agony. He slashed downward, severing the illusions, forcing the world to solidify. He charged. The Naltir struck, once, twice, each blow trailing arcs of soul venom that shattered the air like glass. But the heart screamed. Shadow flame erupted from Vexira like a tidal wave. Not heat, not energy, but forgetting. It struck Malric mid-leap, and his armor groaned. Runes flared, souls wailed. His left pauldron melted, fused into his rib cage, and his sword arm trembled as black fire crawled along his skin. He howled, not in pain but in defiance. He struck again, Natia piercing her veil of defense, slicing into her side. No blood came, just lightless vapor, escaping like breath from a long-dead corpse. She turned to him then, fully, and spoke. "You never had a name." The words were soft. The effect was cataclysm. Malric's mind fractured. He saw his past, his childhood, his ascension, his triumphs, invert. Memories became predators feeding on one another. His thoughts began to loop, consume, and die. He staggered, blood pouring from his eyes, ears, and mouth. His blade clattered to the earth. He dropped to his knees. Vexira drifted forward, cradling his head with hands that were no longer hands, just possibilities, half-formed things that pulsed with hate. She whispered again, "Now burn." The heart unleashed its wrath. Shadow flame engulfed Malric, erupting from his skin as his body arched backward in a rictus of pure agony. Flesh sloughed from bone in wet, steaming strips. His skeleton twisted, imploding on itself as his soul tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. No gates, no gods, only her. His final scream echoed not through the air, but through history, carved into the ruined bones of the world. Amen? Silence. Where Malric Draith had knelt, there remained only a smear of melted armor, a warped sword, and a shadow that still twitched. The last Lord of Draith was gone, and Vexira, cradled by the heart, turned her gaze upward to the worlds yet untouched, and smiled. Chapter 17. Shadows Ascendant. The death of Malric Draith was not marked by celebration, nor mourning, nor silence. It was marked by unreality. The moment he was consumed, the air around the heart folded. Time staggered. The earth hiccuped. Stars blinked, flickered, and reappeared in patterns not known since the world was young and screaming. The crater that had once been Bloodspire shivered, groaned, and then stilled, as though the land itself were holding its breath. In the center, Vexira hung in the sky like a wound left open too long. She had no need for wings or wind or magic. She was suspended by will alone, and the heart pulsed behind her, no longer an artifact, no longer a relic of ancient power. It had become a core, a nucleus, an organ of something larger and darker, something with no shape, something that watched the universe with interest and hunger. And it had chosen Vexira as its tongue. Her body changed. It was not a transformation, but a dismemberment of identity. Her limbs stretched, warping into elegant appendages that flickered between presence and thought. Her skin cracked like eggshell, revealing a lattice of pure void beneath, not empty, but full of movement, writhing things that whispered secrets in languages that killed birds in mid-flight. Her hair unraveled into tendrils of ink, drifting without air, stroking the world like curious fingers. Her face lost its boundaries, becoming a mask of shifting expressions, all of them wrong, none of them hers. At any moment she could be seen smiling with 7 mouths, or weeping from eyes that were not hers but yours. From her spine grew thorns made of shadow glass, fanning out like the plumage of a cosmic predator. Her feet no longer touched ground. There was no ground left beneath her. Only a coiled mist, thick and oozing with ancestral guilt and unborn scream. What remained of her court looked on in awe and terror. Some tried to flee. Their shadows strangled them mid-run. Others dropped to their knees and began speaking in reverse, their eyes turned inside out, their loyalty burning so fiercely that their hearts burst from their chests and beat in the open like drums of madness. Those who lived now lived through her. She had become more than High Matron, more than Queen, more than Goddess. She was now the Vexicon, the flesh thought of the Heart of Ulgu, its memory and mouth. From her came edicts not spoken but imposed. Entire warbands of scavengers attempting to loot the ruins of Bloodspire found themselves transformed into echoes, intangible phantoms condemned to reenact their deaths again and again, visible only under the blackened moon. The survivors of House Varnix, shattered and scattered, were gathered to her side not by messengers or magic, but by dream. They awoke with blood on their tongues, hands raw from crawling, drawn by instinct to the crater. They arrived naked, weeping, blind and reborn. Her faithful. Her army of unpeople. House Draith was not remembered. Their names were erased from stone and soul alike. Where their cities once stood, now only fields of mirrors remained, reflecting a sky none could recognize, a past none could claim. The lands that once bore their sigils now whispered only her name in the wind. Even gods took notice. Scribes of Cain felt their runes flicker. The hog sorceresses of Grond wept until their eyes fell from their skulls. The black ark, known as Void's Hunger, was found adrift in the sea of chill. Its crew melted into the walls, their final moments etched into flesh like holy scripture. None could touch her. None dared, because she was not real anymore. Not in the way mortals understood. She was not alive, not dead, not even undead. She was an expression, the will of the heart, walking, whispering, shaping, a mother to shadows, the queen of silence, the prophecy in motion. And she turned her gaze to the horizon, where other empires slept unaware, where gods squabbled and men bled for thrones of stone and banners of cloth. And she smiled, because they had not yet heard her voice, but they would. Chapter 18. The Last Stand. The last bastion of Bloodspire was not a fortress. It was a wound. Beneath the crumbling colonnades of the bone atrium, once the seat of Varnic's law and execution, Isari crouched amidst shattered marble and the rotting banners of a dynasty undone. Her skin was a map of healing scars and fresh lacerations. Her left arm remained in a sling, bound in a paste of powdered daemon bone and ashwort. Her glaive, Whisperfang, rested across her lap like a sleeping beast. Its runes now whispered incoherently, ever since the heart's ascension. She hadn't slept in days. Sleep meant dreams, and in the dreams, her mother was always watching. Around her were the last loyalists, or at least the last sane ones. A handful of elite guards, a death priest who refused to speak but still bled prayers from his eyes, and a dozen emaciated soldiers who clung to blades like rosaries. All of them knew they were going to die. None cared. Not anymore. Vexira's reign had become total. She didn't need food or walls or blood. She needed faith, and the city had given it to her, willingly or not. Those who bowed to her will found themselves transfigured. Their skin grew transparent, revealing pulsing veins of shadow. They stopped aging, they stopped speaking, they simply obeyed. They wandered the husk of Bloodspire like wraiths, smiling and humming lullabies Isari remembered from childhood. But the worst part, worse than the unmaking, the deaths, the slaughter, was recognition. Isari still saw her mother behind the madness, still saw her face beneath the mask of shifting void, still heard her voice in the corners of her mind, whispering comfort, even as her world burned. That was why she had to strike. Not out of revenge, but out of mercy. They moved through the forgotten tunnels beneath the Heart's throne, ancient, blood-slicked paths used centuries ago to transport prisoners and ritual sacrifices. The air was choked with sulfur and rot. The walls pulsated now, alive with veins of living shadow. In places the stone breathed. Some of her followers wept. Once one gouged out his own eyes, swearing he saw himself walking toward him in the darkness, whispering secrets only the dead should know. Another collapsed as his own shadow throttled him, wrapping around his throat like a noose and dragging his twitching body into a crack in the floor that hadn't been there moments before. Still, Isari pressed on. She remembered the layout. Before the city turned, before her mother lost her mind to the heart, she had trained here, and now she would die here, or kill here. They reached the final gate, a rune-sealed vault that opened into the base of the throne chamber. The seals were corroded. The script no longer resembled language. It moved when stared at too long. Isari pressed her palm to the center. The door screamed. Then it opened. The chamber was a cathedral of shadow. Columns stretched far beyond what the eye could follow. Floors shimmered with liquid memory, images of the siege replayed beneath their feet, looping endlessly. Varnic's children burned alive, Draith warlords exploding in curses, towers falling, bodies screaming, then falling again. And at the center, on a throne of bone, Vexira waited. No gods, no entourage, just her. Isari stepped forward, whispering to her remaining warriors. "Hold them off," she said, eyes fixed on her mother, because the moment the vault had opened, they began to crawl from the walls. Creatures of ink and memory, corrupted gods, transformed nobles, twisted mirror signs of those who had died in the city. They spilled from the stone like blood from an old wound, shrieking and twitching with joy. And the room erupted into chaos. Blades clashed, magic howled, flesh tore, and Isari walked, slow and deliberate, toward her mother. Vexira rose, her form shifting, one arm a branch of fingers, the other a stream of black fire. Her eyes were still hers, but filled now with something else, something older. "Daught," she cooed, Come to me. I'm not yours anymore." Isari said, raising Whisper Fang. "You were never just mine," Vexira whispered. "You are Ulgu's, and it is time you remembered." They clashed in an explosion of shadow and steel. Isari's blade cut deep, carving through flesh that hissed and healed mid-slice. Vexira's tendrils lashed out, wrapping around her daughter's waist and flinging her through a pillar. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. Isari rose again. They fought like beasts. No elegance, no strategy, only pain, only rage, only memory. "You used to sing to me," Isari screamed, striking high, cutting low. "You used to love me." "I still do," Vexira hissed, slamming a spike of darkness through her daughter's thigh. "Which is why I offer you transcendence." Isari howled, twisted free, and drove her blade through her mother's abdomen. Vexira staggered, for the first time truly wounded. But she smiled. "You learned," she said, coughing mist. "You always learn too late." To the heart above, a final pulse descended. It struck the floor, shattering it, flinging Isari back into the arms of her dying men. Only 3 left, barely standing, bleeding from every pore. She looked up and saw Vexira ascending again, her form growing. Not just a woman, and not just a queen, but a god in motion. Isari clenched her jaw even as her leg bled, even as her vision blurred. She was not done yet, not while breath remained. And as the heart pulsed again, louder than thunder, deeper than the sea, Isari prepared for her final act. Chapter 19. The Sundering Oath. The chamber groaned, not with stone or structure, but with fate. Above, the heart of Ulgu beat with a rhythm too complex for time itself, radiating pulses of lightless force that bent gravity, shredded thought, and pulled the veil between realms into shreds. What remained of Bloodspire trembled at its core, not from physical stress, but from metaphysical tension. It was too much, too powerful, too alive. And Vexira, now fully ascended, stood in the eye of the storm, limbs outstretched, her body little more than a vessel of woven shadow and agony. Her face shifted between dozens of masks, child, matron, warrior, beast, goddess, and nothing. All forms, all lies. Below her, Isari bled. Her right arm hung by tendon alone, her leg a mangled mess of armor and splintered bone. Her skin was flayed in strips across her shoulder, revealing muscles that twitched with each rasped breath. She could no longer see out of one eye. It had boiled away when Vexira's sorcery ignited the very air. Her remaining allies lay dead, burned, unwritten. A priest's bones clung to charred robes. Another's face had melted into his own chest, fused like wax. The last still twitched, praying in reverse. But Isari had Whisperfang, and more importantly, she had purpose. The heart was singing now, low, deep, dragging reality to its knees. Walls peeled like paper, memories bled from the cracks in the stone. Somewhere the past screamed. And Isari stood, screaming. She charged. Her broken leg buckled, snapped entirely, but she crawled, one hand forward, then the other. Blood smeared the marble. Her lungs wheezed like punctured bellows. The glaive was a weight of eternity in her hand, the same blade she'd held as a girl, now trembling with righteous violence. Vexira descended to greet her, her smile wide, too wide, breaking her jaw open like a hinge. "You never understood," she whispered. "You were always just a fragment, a mirror of my—" Isari threw the glaive. Nautic Vexir. Schnit the heart. The blade spun, screaming through the air. The moment it struck, the world stopped. A single note, higher than the scream of birth, deeper than the silence of the grave, split the chamber. The heart cracked. Once, twice. On the third, it shattered. Not like glass, like existence. It ruptured in all directions, not a shock wave, but a shear in being. Sound died, light inverted. The structure of reality itself peeled backward like the skin from a screaming beast. Vexira's scream became legion, 1,000 howling voices layered over hers, as if all she had ever consumed or become screamed in tandem. Her body erupted into black fire, every bone bursting outward, every vein liquefying into radiant sorrow. Her form exploded, then imploded, torn into conceptual filaments and scattered through fractured dimensions. Izari was caught in the epicenter. Her body vaporized, her soul screamed and was heard, and the city died. Bloodspire folded. Buildings curled in on themselves. Towers spiraled inward until their tips touched their own foundations. Streets bent into arcs and spirals. Fires burned backward. The dead rose only to collapse again in waves of gray ash. And then, the crater exploded. A wave of null force rolled outward in every direction, a silent tsunami of destruction that tore the land clean to bedrock. Mountains bowed, rivers evaporated midstream, forests burned without heat, and when it ended, there was nothing. Plain of glass and bone. At its center, a single black rose grew, slick with shadow. Around it, silence. Stillness. No birds. No insects. No gods. Only echoes of an oath broken, and a daughter's final act. Epilogue. The Song of Ashes. The world did not end when Bloodspire fell. It merely shifted. For a time, the world tried to forget. Maps were redrawn. Trade routes skirted the glass field where the city once stood. The name Varnix was outlawed in several courts, and in others spoken only with reverence, whispered over sacrificial altars and muttered through broken teeth in back-alley blood rites. But Bloodspire had not been erased. Its memory clung like ash in the lungs of history. And somewhere, beneath the crust of that leveled plain, something still beat. In taverns and warrens, where the light of the Witch King did not reach, bards sang songs that made listeners weep, scream, or kill. Not all songs were remembered, but this one never left. They called it the Song of Ashes. It began with the sound of weeping, then silence, then the soft rhythm of war drums played on bones. Voices layered over it, low and broken, repeating names that no longer existed. The melody was haunting, agonizing, beautiful. It told the story of two houses, of pride, of betrayal, of a daughter who stood against a mother who had become a god. But the final verse was always different. Some said Isari lived on, reborn in the shattered realms beyond Ulgu, watching, waiting. Others swore her soul was bound in that final scream, fused with the ashes of the heart, becoming a song itself, carried by winds that had forgotten where they were born. Ill with it, and some believed she failed, that her sacrifice only slowed the inevitable, because things began to change. Scavenger tribes sent to sift through the ruins returned wrong. Eyes glossy, voices flat, shadows that didn't follow the sun. They brought back artifacts, black shards that whispered when handled, coins that bled when clutched too long, armor that moved when no one wore it. A woman was found weeping beneath the moon, her mouth sewn shut with her own hair, repeating a name no one could understand. An entire mercenary band vanished in the crater. When the next group came searching, they found a garden of rib cages, blooming with dark flowers. One of the scouts picked a bloom. He sang for 3 days, then exploded into a cloud of moths made of teeth. Worse still were the dreams. People across Naggaroth began to speak of a tower rising from glass, seen only in sleep, spiraling upward with no foundation, no sky, no end. In the dreams they heard a voice. Not Vexira's, not Ysari's. They were feminine, kind, and hungry. In the court of Harganeth, the executioners found one of their ancient statues, a depiction of Cain slaying Slaaneash's children, weeping blood from its eyes. In the slave markets of Clare Caron, all the children born on the same night bore the mark of a black rose over their hearts, even those whose mothers were miles from the crater. And in the deepest vaults of the sorceress conclave, a prophecy long buried beneath chains and words began to rewrite itself in burning script. The heart sleeps. The queen remembers. The daughter waits. The song begins anew. No one claimed responsibility. No one wanted to. But even in silence everyone agreed. Bloodspire was gone. But something else had risen in its place. Think not a city, not a kingdom, not even a god. An idea. And ideas never die.